Hi, my name's Nate. I run Jesus People SF, and today I want to briefly meditate on the subject of what was the deal with the Magi bowing at the feet of infant Jesus, I believe in the Gospel of Luke. And if you have never done a deep dive on this particular subject, the Magi are basically literally magicians. Like, have you ever wondered who these Magi were? They're not just wise men. And usually the Bible would not apply the title wise men to people who practice what the Magi practice. But, translators feel comfortable translating that word wise men because they're bowing to Jesus and even worshiping the infant Jesus. Now, there are a few groups that visited Jesus in his infancy. There are a couple of saints, only a couple, who were literally waiting for Christ. One is a lady named Anna and another named Ananias. Both of these greeted the Christ when he went to the temple. There is also the shepherds who were, I believe, the first group to see the infant Christ. They saw a star resting over the place of Jesus's birth, and they came in from the field. And then the third group is the Magi. And the Magi are Babylonian. These are the same kind of group of people that Daniel would have rubbed shoulders day to day, especially early on in his time in Babylon, because he was trained in the arts of the Magi. And that's what the first few chapters of Daniel are discussing, is Daniel was trained to be like these Magi. Now, what I find interesting is the question of why. Not just why does the Bible put it there, because I'm sure many things happened to Jesus that are not recorded for us in the scripture. And it seems to me that at least one reason why the Magi are recorded as having given literal worship to Christ. Now, some translators of the Bible and interpreters dispute whether their worship was actual like human to divine worship, because that word has more uses than just that. Nevertheless, they literally travel over the entirety of the ancient world, like as far as geography goes, to be able to meet with the Christ. And then they give enormous amounts of treasure to him. And then they bow to him, and the word uses worship. So I think the context actually does mean they literally worshipped him. And the Magi they're astrologers. They're people who observe the stars. And the Bible is very clear. It gives no credence to astrology as something that Christians or Jews should practice. Nevertheless, the Bible does say that there are signs in the heavens, and apparently the star that was over the Christ was a very apparent sign. It's one of those signs that you just can't help but not miss. And so the fact that the star was so apparent to the Magi and to the shepherds, so it was. So they followed it and they found the Christ. But the Magi sort of, to me, represent the sum total of paganism. If you look at Daniel's book, the head of the statue of all the paganism that ever was is Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. And it has several different empires that are composite, but they're below the head, which is Babylon. And so Babylon, even going back to the just after the flood, the Tower of Babel is kind of like the biblical origin of the idea of Babylon. And here you have these Magi coming, not kicking and screaming, not being tricked by God, but coming consciously, willingly, with full agreement to bow to the Christ. And these are obviously very wealthy men. These are men that are astrologers simply because that's their people, that's their kind. And yet they seem to be giving a sort of like agreement, like a Gentile agreement, like they're kind of like a symbolic pagan agreement to follow the Christ. And they're among the first to be there with Christ. And then what happens after the Christ is resurrected? What happens after the Christ is ascended? Well, he sends his Spirit forth, and aside from a few remnant Jews who are converted in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth, it's mostly a Gentile movement till this day. And to me, it's sort of like things coming full circle with regard to Babylon as an idea. It's like the Babylonians simply agree that the Christ is to be king. And they even use the word King of the Jews. They use this word when they're talking to Herod, I believe, in the Gospels. And so it's just so interesting to me that we've had 2,000 years of harvest of the Gentiles. And I wonder if this is kind of the Father's way of kind of signaling why it was, on at least a human or like temporal level, why was the gospel so effective for so long among the Gentiles? And I think it was because it was simply something that the Gentiles were just ready for. If you look at the Gentiles in the gospel that are recorded, like the centurion, just different Gentiles, the Syrophoenician woman who begs Jesus to heal her daughter even though he resists her, they are so filled with readiness, so filled with faith to trust Christ and to believe God for great things. But I have to also say this, that it seems like the time has come for the tail end of the Gentiles. In fact, if you look at Matthew 24, Jesus describes something called the end of the season of the Gentiles, or the end of the time of the Gentiles. Paul uses a similar kind of language in Romans chapter 11. And so it seems to me that very intentionally, by God's doing, it is intended for the time of the Gentiles to be bookended. Now, with that said, I mean, I will be freaking honest, I'm not very impressed with the behavior of the nation state of Israel right now. Not particularly impressed by Jews generally. And I will just say that I still support Israel out of a kind of spiritual obligation to the prophets who promise that in the last days there will be this filling of the numbers of the Jews in the elect. But I don't yet see that same readiness that the Gentiles showed in the Gospels. Maybe it's just too early. Maybe I just don't see it because I haven't yet seen it. But it just seems to me like, at least in terms of the fruitfulness and the graciousness of God working through the Gentiles, kind of like getting really frickin' dry, to the point where the church is more known for scandals, for bad politics, for bad theology, for bad practical theology of how they live, than they are for following Christ, winning souls, being holy. So it doesn't look good for either the Jews or the Gentiles right now. Maybe that will change. I hope it changes. But this is just kind of a meditation on, what is the whole Magi thing? What is the whole bowing early? And it seems to me it is really something. And I will also say Matthew 24 and I believe Luke 21 and Joel chapter 2 all promise that before the last days wind down, there will be signs in the heavens above and on the earth below. This is Joel, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. So maybe there will be a new sign in the heavens that will be a harbinger for Jews to fill the ranks of true Christians. Maybe that will happen. I hope so. Anyway, I hope this meditation was interesting to you. I personally don't celebrate Advent. I'm very much a Puritan when it comes to Christian holidays. I don't celebrate Advent, Christmas. I don't celebrate Easter because God never officially issued forth a command to observe these things. Just like, I don't know. To me, that makes a difference. But I will say this might make an interesting thought, kind of motivation thing with a lot of people who do observe and celebrate Advent. So regardless, celebrate Jesus. Don't celebrate like random cultural crap. Thanks. Bye.